with Viva La Sam. I'm Sam, and this is a show where we talk to people who play Blood on the Clocktower and get their player perspective of the game. And we are live from Final 3Con. This is being recorded, and it'll be on our YouTube as a normal episode. This is also right now being live streamed on Twitch. So hello, Twitch. I also want to give a big shout out to Nina, who helped not just the channel, but this panel all come together. She's helping a lot of other people, other panels, other channels. She does a lot of work. So give it up for Nina, please. All right, and then our special guest for this episode is Ed Gabriel.
Hi.
All right, we always do an opening hard claim question. Don't look at our groom that's up on the screen, but we are doing Badman Rising. I got my box up there. I'm very excited that for once I can actually have somebody pull a token out of a bag and see what character you get.
See, it's also rare that I'm actually drawing a token from a bag. I didn't realize I was getting that echo. Because a lot of the time I get someone else to do it and give it to me. So, interesting.
Well,
do you want to guess based on my response?
Interesting? I would say, well, if I had to guess, then I might give it away.
Yeah, so I've got the Sailor. Love the Sailor. One of the best characters in BMR. All the bad characters in BMR are one of the best characters in BMR, but don't ask questions.
All right, so let's see. Sailor is, hypothetically, you're in seat 2.
Uh-huh.
So hypothetically, what seat would you just randomly drink with on night 1?
Not my neighbors. Anyone else.
Anybody else?
Yeah, so let's go with
right.
9.
All right. That is the choice.
There was some a real combination of reactions came across the faces in front of me, which is, I'm pretty sure I shouldn't be using that, but my social read of the audience was interesting.
It's part of the fun. We don't take this super seriously. But with that said, so let's say it's day 1, you and I are chatting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, 1, do you go ahead and chat with the person that you've drank with?
I don't. Mainly because the most useful thing for a sailor is for other people to tell you that they were drunk and they need to work out why. So I will tell someone, actually it's me, I will tell no one that I'm a sailor. I'll be more honest on this. I don't hard claim early. I don't think it's necessarily useful a lot of the time. I will hard claim if I have a good reason to. But like I say, the sailor is a character that can confirm itself in 2 different ways. One of which requires other people to not know that you're the sailor in order to do that. And obviously the second one being not dying yourself. But in BMR, there's lots of reasons to not die. My favorite reason to confirm that I am the sailor is if there's no good reason for that person to get bad information or to malfunction, and if I'm the only way that can have worked. If I've claimed sailor on the first couple of days, that's not actually going to help me. So I'm not claiming sailor. I'm probably claiming, I don't know, exorcist. It lines up chambermaid-wise, as long as I wasn't picked on the first night. I might claim, sometimes I'll claim courtier because people don't bluff courtier enough. Evil teams bluff courtier, but good players don't. You need to start doing that. It's really powerful, it's really strong, it's really interesting how people respond to you as a good player bluffing courtier, especially when they're evil. You're going to get a much better read from an evil player bluffing courtier than you are going to get from bluffing almost anything else, because there is a moment of panic in an evil player going like, oh, do I need to worry about that now? Have you already picked my character? So I really like bluffing courtier, and as with sailor, it's a nice combination. Admittedly, I'm less likely as the courtier to have drunked a good player than I am as the sailor, but it's an option.
Yeah, excellent. All right, so let's talk about your history with Blood on the Clocktower.
Mm-hmm.
How and when did you discover the game?
I discovered it on Kickstarter. Like, the Kickstarter went live, and at the time I was a real Kickstarter nerd. I was backing the GDP of a small nation every year of projects, and it went live, and I saw it and went, that looks great. I had played no social deduction games. The closest I'd come to social deduction was like Wing Murder at school. Really nothing. And was like, this seems fun. I like the idea of this, and then backed it, speculatively, which turns out to have been a good choice based on price. And told a friend of mine, I was really excited about it, and she's a competent human, and immediately Googled this game that I'd been really excited telling her about, and she went, someone's running it, a couple of cities over in the UK. It's like an hour and a half drive. Do you want to go play with this guy who's running it already? And I was like, sure, let's go play. That was Ben. running in his home city at his home board game store.
You might know.
Yeah, you might have seen him around. With some of the people who became the original TPI stream team were basically some of the people from that store and my local group in Sheffield in the UK. So you'd recognise quite a lot of the names if I could remember them. I know that Jack was there, and then a fair few others. But yeah, rolled up, played some games with Ben, had a great time. Homebrewed a grimoire out of magnets, magnet-based grimoire, which is great, but you can't fly with it. Don't try that. I was talking to someone about this yesterday. I tried to get through Heathrow with a magnet grimoire, and they absolutely lost it. I was detained for 4 hours, and the only reason I was able to leave was because I knew one of the security guys. I had to call my friend Bus and was like, can you come over to the detainment room in Heathrow and take my grimoire home with you tonight so that I can fly to where I'm supposed to be going, because otherwise I ain't leaving. And happily he rolled up and was like, yeah, this is fine. And they trusted him a lot more when he was showing them pictures of what Blood on the Clocktower was than when I tried to do it for the last 3 hours. So yeah, don't do that. Magnets really don't look great on airport scanners, but it's great because if you fall over or you stumble or anything else, you don't lose anything in your grim. Nothing ever moves. Magnets are solid. They don't go anywhere. I really liked my magnet grim, and then I got official ones. And it was actually slightly less fun because I didn't build it. But yeah, rolled around with my homebrew grim and ran to a bunch of conventions, and I ended up running something like 120 games between those first 2 games I played with Ben, where we played TB, and then a homebrew script that Ben had made. That's my introduction to Clocktower. And then I played 120-something games, and then ran 120-something games even, and then played my 3rd game of Clocktower. This is like the scale of my storytelling kind of goes in that proportion. I'm running, 50 to 100 times as many games as I'm playing. Well, it's got a lot more now because other people willingly storytell, which wasn't the case in 2018 and 19.
I imagine it's a lot harder than
yeah, yeah, and like that included turning up to conventions with Ben. And Ben, I attended my first convention, and Ben was A, hungover, which will surprise probably not very many people, and B had scheduled himself to run games on the hour every hour from 9 a.m. till 2 a.m. every day for a 3-day convention. And he made it to midway through the Saturday, and I'd arrived on the Saturday morning, joined one of his first games, had a good time. And he made it to midway through the Saturday, and he turned around to me and went, you know how this works, right? And I was like, yeah. Like, I can storytell, this is fine. And he went, great, can you storytell the next game? And walked away, because he was just struggling so much. So we spent the rest of the convention alternating who was running TV. We had a great time. Ben turned around to me later that night and was like, the midnight game is supposed to be a 20-player S&V. Could you do this 20-player S&V for me? And I was like, sure. Night 2, Snake Charmer gets the demon. The Serenovus makes the ex-Snake Charmer, now demon, mad. The Harlot also picks the Snake Charmer, now demon. There was also the new demon killed a barber, so also had to make a barber swap. And like, I just kept waking up this poor sod who was like, I don't even understand, what do you want from me? Like, why are you back? It was an interesting time. I did make mistakes, but everyone was very amused when the game suddenly ended on day 4. And this person's like, don't ask questions. I had a ride. But yeah, that's kind of where I came into Clocktower, and then just ended up doing more and more stuff with TPI. And eventually they were like, can you stop telling us things that are wrong from the outside? Can you give us the feedback internally? And so I ended up doing that sort of thing.
And what about the game hooked you to it that kept you wanting to come back 120 plus times?
I find people really interesting. Like most of the game for me is about, there's 2 things. One is it's a community in a box. Like I really like this phrase. I don't remember who coined it, but I love it. It is just an excuse to spend time with people in a way that people don't normally do, right? You don't talk to people except your close friends, especially as adults. Like, when's the last time you met an adult not at a convention or not at a games event and had a conversation with them about something that was interesting and mattered rather than just the weather and how was work today and all this sort of thing? And like the thing about Clocktower is you have a load of conversations about the game and you feel like you know someone. Like Sam and I is quite a good example here. We'd been in a Clocktower sphere and like responding to things on Discord and various other bits and pieces for quite a long time, probably a year or more, before we ever actually had a conversation as people about people stuff. But it meant that I knew Sam, but I didn't know Sam. But it felt like I did. So there's a real connection there without having to do the really awkward, hi, I'm Ed, who are you? And like having to do all the social stuff that is difficult for a lot of people. And so I love that about the game. It brings people together without them realizing that they're being brought together. And then they realize they're friends. They're like, but I don't know what you do. I don't know if you're in a relationship. I don't know. I literally know none of the important things. But you are my friend. And that's like the quintessential joy of Clocktower. Is it's an excuse to make friends without thinking you're making them.
And this convention is a great example of that, because I remember when I got to come 2 years ago, what I always thought was, no matter where you went, you sat next to somebody and you just had some kind of connection. Maybe you've talked to them online a lot. Maybe you haven't even talked to them, but you at least knew you had some kind of connection with them. And now you're meeting them face to face and chatting with them. Not Clocktower, but also just everything else.
Yeah. And the convention was that for me as well, because like the original admin team of the convention, which I was on, were all people, like everyone else on the convention team had met each other. They were all Americans. They'd all played at Gen Con, Origins, various other conventions together. And then there was me from the other side of an ocean. And so I rolled up to this convention being not 100% certain about how things were going to go, because these people all knew each other like really well. They spent a lot of time together, and they had played 5 to 10 games on streams with me, maybe. And like we chatted on Discord and various other bits and pieces, and then ended up helping make this convention happen. And rolled up, and I think we rolled up on the Thursday afternoon, and I probably had 60 hugs in that first 3 hours from people I'd never met before and had only ever spoken to online. And that was like just the most beautiful interaction, because there's no reason that never any other situation would you roll up to that situation. And it just, everyone was like, happy to see you, had a real connection. It was really beautiful. Like that convention was really lovely, just because it was the first time that so many of these people got to meet each other, and the international crowd were able to come, and they had a good excuse to be here. And it wasn't just all of the American convention scene just going from one convention to another, right? Yeah. So it was really lovely.
Yeah, and I know, again, I swear this isn't a panel just about gushing about the con, although maybe that should be its own panel. But, we had our own online group. Met a bunch of them. Some of them are here. A couple just walked in, but they, we all met. You get I'm the kind of person who gets a little bit of anxiety when you're meeting somebody face to face that you've only seen online. But 30 seconds in, you're like, oh, I know these people. Hey, we're all mingling. Go out to eat. Good time. I always like to ask about playing in person versus online. You're somebody who would have, of course, played in person first. Mm-hmm. Pandemic happens. What are your thoughts and feelings about playing online versus in person? 2 different games.
Like, I fully go to that level. Probably 70% of the game I play in person is about reading people. You just can't do it online, even with cameras, no matter how good your cameras are, no matter how good your audio is. One of the things that I've noticed quite a lot is that people are like, I can tell, I thought that I was good at reading people online, but when I'm in person, I can hear when someone's evil in their voice. And it's like, yes. Because almost all voice transmission over the internet cuts the highs and lows of your voice, and you lose treble, you lose bass, you lose a lot of the things that give you tells in person, unless you have incredibly good cameras and incredibly good microphones and on Nina, then you don't have that same vocal quality that you get in person. And so that's just one of hundreds of other ways that people notice things. You're watching people move and how they're interacting and how they physically bring themselves into a space. Like I ran a game earlier. I don't think anyone here was in it, so this is fine. Where I was like, if I'd been playing, I'd have called you out as the demon, because he spent the entire first 2 days basically huddled in on himself, being like, leave me alone. I'm not interested. And only came out of that when he was like, oh no, a minion's on the block, and he nominated to get things moving. And it's like, that's a tell that you're never going to have anywhere else. So all of the physical stuff is in person only, and doesn't happen online. And what happens online instead is you have a lot more time, you don't have your eyes closed, and so your brain works better. I keep quoting this, and at some point I should actually look up the damn study and find out what the number is. But there was a study that basically said your brain is 60% less effective with your eyes closed. That's why you struggle to think at night, because you're trying to talk about the game, you're trying to think about the game, and conversing with people is good. And this is why one of the reasons why people are worried about should we be talking about the game at night. It's like, well, as long as you're not narrating your night actions, the answer is yes, because it keeps you thinking about the game and it's a lot easier. Because if you try and think about the game with your eyes closed, wildly less effective. And this is one of the reasons why online games tend to skew good a lot more often, and or they skew a lot more to like being able to do really specific plays because you have the time with your eyes open, with a grimoire in front of you to work out what you're doing. And so it makes it a very different game as a result because you have all the time to think and plan and logic and do all the things you need to do, which you just don't in person. Also, the fact that in person, a lot of the time, people will have conversations about stuff that has nothing to do with the game, which does not help. But it does make it a completely different game to me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I've had a mix of responses. Some think it's kind of a different game. Some like, no, it's the same game, even if it's a little different. And I partially wonder if that has to do with somebody who started playing the game in person, especially before the pandemic, versus whether or not they started online. I'm not sure if there's a difference there or not.
But you should do the study. Like, you know.
I feel like it's somebody else who's more qualified for that.
You should tell Nor to do the study, is what you should do. Like, Nor would send out that questionnaire, and I think that'd be really interesting. Like, when did you start playing? How do you feel like, how much do you feel like the game overlaps? Where's the Venn diagram between online and person?
Another interesting thing I've noticed, and I was telling this to Adam Birch yesterday. He's like, if Steve hears that, he'll be upset. But, you know, the online game is supposed to basically kind of be a mimicry of an in-person game. But I've also seen a lot of, I think people are started online and then they're playing in person. They're treating the in-person game as a mimicry of like the online game.
Yeah.
You know, they're like going into literally separate rooms and I don't know. It's just interesting to see, I guess, that difference of how people are playing based on where they began.
Yeah, I'd have been really interested how the game would have developed had the pandemic not happened, because there was already the change happening. So, context for anyone who may or may not know this, the original version of the game, the version that's in the rulebook, you do not leave the circle. Like, you have a circle of chairs and no one goes outside of the circle of chairs. Any and all private conversations are done within the circle. And so most of the time I don't have a script, but you're behind your script, talking to each other.
And I tell people that and they're like, they look at me funny, or it's usually through Discord.
So like all of the original games were run like that. All of the playtesting before the game went on Kickstarter was run like that. It was only after the Kickstarter, and because, amongst others, I don't want to put this on Ben entirely, but Ben is one of the real leaders in this. He didn't read the rulebook very clearly and didn't notice the bit where it said that you don't leave the circle, and so he was happily letting people wander off to talk, and that's just what trended for a while. And then when we started playing online, you don't really have an option because you can't have group conversations with private chats as part of it. So you had to have exclusivity on the private chats. But that then means you are setting in stone that pattern of whispers are private and whispers are not in a group. And I'd be really interested whether in the long run, had the pandemic not happened and had there not been such a drive onto playing online, firstly, I think the game would have been less popular, significantly. But had it been less popular or had it been as popular, it would have been really interesting to see how that dynamic would have moved, because I think we would have had like regionalizations and factions, and especially here in the US, where it's quite easy for someone to be like, if someone set up games in New York, San Francisco, San Diego, wherever, they would run it the way they run it, and then all the people who came to their local game group will run it the way they run it, and then those people will buy the game and they'll run other games in that city, and people won't realize that they're just picking up that mimetic norm from the one person who happened to teach them to play. And so it would have been really interesting, had there not been the globalization of the online process, would those regionalizations have been, someone moves from New York to San Diego and goes, you do what? That might be really interesting, but we'll never know. So, hypothesis is unprovable, but I think it'd be interesting.
Sometimes I think about like the progression of a player going from like, say, beginner player to an intermediate player to an experienced player. And I'm curious if you have any thoughts about different play styles, your own play style as you started learning the game, how you see others play as they get more and more experience throughout however many games.
I think I'm weird.
Okay, well, we knew that.
Because of that really odd sort of rhythm of playing versus storytelling, and also because of the fact that I ended up storytelling up and down the country, for a lot of people, by the time I played my third and fourth games, I had such a concrete knowledge of not just the game, but also my reads were vastly above where they would otherwise have been, because I'm sitting there going, I've watched 1,000 people go through this process of playing their first, second, third games, and so I can see the patterns of how people are interacting and how some of those reads might occur. When I wouldn't have done had I just played that many games with those people, it would have been a different situation. And so I was coming in from a very strange place. So I came in from a very academic, like storyteller style understanding of playing the game. So it was a bit strange. So I'm not a good example. But like one of the things across the board about people's play styles as they develop is that they are massively changeable as soon as you get past the basics. Once you know how to play TB, bets are off, and there's sort of an explosion in various different directions, because playstyles are all about people's comfort in logic and comfort in social activity. And I'll plug this happily. Later in the con, Milk, Nora, and I are doing a panel about a lot of things, but a lot of things about the social contract and how people interact socially. And there's a whole chunk where we're going to be talking about the neurospicy appeal of Clocktower. And that is one of the things that I think is really key in Clocktower and how people have ended up playing, is that we've been very welcoming to a massively queer community and a massively neurospicy community, which the gaming world thinks it is but isn't. There's a lot of white men in the gaming world, and there is a lot of autism. There's a lot of different mental health struggles there, and the gaming world is weirdly welcoming, and Clocktower has been openly welcoming. What that's meant is that people are very accepting of do it play how you like, play how you want to. Where if the more normative gaming world had been the drive there, it would have much more sort of collided those. No, you play in these. There's like 5 styles. There's 4. Like the research says there's 4 ways that people play games. I can never remember what they are. The names that people use, but it's the Tammy, Timmy, those things. If you've heard of those, great. If you haven't, don't worry about it. But it's like there's the classic axis of how chaotic and how ordered you are, and how social and how logical you are. And like where you sit in these 4 quadrants would have been the main way that you'd think of Clocktower players. But because we welcomed a lot of people who are normally minorities and told them that they can do what they like within the rules of the game, that didn't happen. It has a bit, like some groups do really clearly have that divide, but broadly it hasn't. And that's been something that I think has been a massive success of the game, because we're turning around to people who struggle with social interaction and go, you can choose to mask or unmask as much as you might want to, because the game allows you to. And because that was set as a precedent very early on by Steve and by Evan and by CPI and then myself and Ben and the Fabled Storytellers and others in the past, everyone just has followed that route of, this is a community and you should play how you want to play. And I've really loved just not having to turn around to people and be like, there's 4 main ways people play Clocktower. And that's not interesting. And this way is more fun. So I didn't specifically answer the question, but I did go on a diatribe about play styles. So,
The answers are more important than questions, I would say.
Yeah, I hear that.
I ran a new player TV game earlier. And some of the players said, they had anxiety. And I was so thrilled to find that afterwards. They were like, this is easier than I thought it was going to be. And it worked. And I don't know. There's something about the game. I won't pretend to know what it is, but something about the game just really seems like it fits for so many different people.
There will be some hypotheses about that in the panel that I mentioned earlier. Yeah, we're going to be talking. That seems like the sort of thing that I should know. Yeah, Nina's recording it, so I trust Nina.
Yeah.
That sounds about right.
Yeah.
I will check that, and then we'll carry on.
That'd be something to check out.
Yeah.
I definitely think that'd be worthwhile.
Thanks, Nina.
Tomorrow, if you're here at the con. Yeah.
Appreciate you. Nina is also recording that, and it may go online in some format. So if you're watching online, watch this space. When I say this space, I mean
not hard claims.
The internet. Yeah. It's well-known and easy.
We'll host it if you want, but I don't think that's
the place. Well-known and easy place to keep an eye on is the internet. That's what I just recommended. We'll just roll with it.
I was telling some family that this is being streamed, and they're like, "Well, what's your Twitch?" And I was like, "You can find it on the hard claim. Just search hard claim. Maybe you'll find it." I don't have any reception down here, so it's hard to send messages.
Yeah.
Hashtag nerf Ed.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I have to ask. I don't even know what to ask about. I just know it's a thing. What do you think the secret is behind hashtag nerf Ed? How do you get to that point where people think you need to be nerfed?
So part of it was the initial, like the start of this comes from when I initially was playing online, and that was because I'd story told for everyone I was playing for. So I mentioned earlier that the original TPI stream group was sort of Ben's local group and my local group. So I set up a local group in Sheffield in the UK. Ben had a group in Derby, and then he was traveling up and down the country and playing with various people. And the first TPI stream was exclusively TPI volunteers that we were just like, oh, we'll put together a group and see what happens. And then rapidly realized that the best times to stream were sort of UK evening, US afternoon, but that sort of eliminates a lot of US players from being able to be useful because it's during work hours, and so we didn't have that many of those. So we basically set up a group to play the TPI streams initially, which we thought was just going to be, a little side project. And maybe 10 people would watch it, and that's fine. It's promotion. It's great. But those were my local group, and that was, so everyone in the original TPI streams had played either exclusively with me as a storyteller, or with me or Ben as a storyteller, and maybe one or two others. And so I'm sat there in a world where, like, I've watched every one of these players play 100 games. Yes, I know when they're lying to me. I've had much more of the experience than they have. So it's much easier for me in the early days to be like, well, I know these people inside out, and in this world. And because their meta isn't developing to include me, because it's developing without me in it and me storytelling, they didn't know how to deal with me being in a different position to how they were, having all learnt the game by playing it 100 times. And so there was a lot of that. And then there's just the fact that I think people don't pay attention to the right things in Clocktower. I've got a strong argument about this. Chris Grace asked me about this in Vegas year before last. He just turned around to me and went, "Can you tell me one thing that I'm doing wrong in Clocktower?" And I went, "Yes. When people are nominating and voting on days 1 and 2, you're looking for two things. One is, if a player is pretending to be casual about voting, but they're a critical vote, they're evil. 80% of the time. Somewhere in that region. Like, a hand going up is fine. A hand going, yeah, I'll vote for this, is automatically a little bit suspicious. That hand doing that when they're like 5th or 6th vote out of 6, so I'm really looking at that person twice. And if they do it more than once, I'm absolutely looking at that person because they just want anyone on the block. And you get patterns like this. You also get people looking at votes, and it happens all the time in person, and people don't pay attention. The glance and then vote is just such a powerful, oh, he's voting, I'm voting. And it's so often evil. It's almost always an evil read. And so things like that, nominations and voting have so much information in, and we train people. I don't know how many of you came from Werewolf and Mafia and various other things, where there's a big obsession about voting, but in not a very Clocktower way. And so all these people come to Clocktower, discover that the nomination voting phase is different, and they're like, oh, I can ignore all of the things I used to know about voting from other social deduction games. And that's true, but there are other things about nominations and voting you should be paying attention to, and it's not just who nominates whom and who votes on whom, it's the patterns of who are you willing to vote on, who are you not willing to vote on. How often are you voting? Are you voting every time? Are you voting for anyone that's not near you? Are you voting every time except for 1 or 2 people? There's a lot of tells there that people don't use, and it's the most obvious thing online because you can't get any other social reads during nominations and voting really, except for vocal ticks. And most of the time, you can read an evil team from a vote by the end of day 2 if they're not paying attention to it. And so I think there was probably 6 to 8 months where I was basically training every player that played on the TPI stream to stop voting in a way that I could be like, evil. So every time we'd finish games, and I'd be like, just so you know, this is why I thought you were evil. And it's not because you were in a double claim or whatever else. It's because on the first 2 days, you voted for everyone. And then on day 3, you stopped voting entirely. And that was, this sort of thing. There was always things going on. So yeah, most of it's from that. People don't pay attention to the same things that I do, and people have started, and therefore I have been caught up, which is great. That's what I want.
Something that stuck out to me when for the TPI stream watching it, I'm pretty sure this was the very first official app theme on the stream. So cameras, and you're the poisoner, and you poisoned Aggie,
Uh.
and she ended up being the empath. If I remember the story, and you told the storytellers, part of being able to see people when they draw a token is you can see a reaction as they draw a token, and you based on how she reacted, you poisoned her. And I remember looking back, because I rewatched the VOD because I wanted to see, and sure enough, when Aggie gets an empath token, she goes.
It's like,
she got poisoned. I think if I recall correctly, it was I don't remember if she was next to an evil player or whatever. It was effective.
Yeah,
it's just a tiny thing like that.
But that's the player I played with. So Aggie lives, at the time lived 15 miles from my house, and we were playing in the same regular group all the time. And there was a thing in my regular group that if I was playing, when Aggie was drawing a token, I'd sit like this. And I cannot look at Aggie, otherwise I'll know what team she's on. And a lot of the time I'll know what token she has. It'll be like one of these three. And so when Aggie's celebrating in TV, probably empath or undertaker at the time. And so
very subtle.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, like half a second.
But you just got to be watching for these things. What else do you want?
I ran some BMR for a group once in person. And a few of the players were brand new. Ran a game, player gets a Godfather token. Second game, I see him draw a token. I see the look on his face, and I said to myself, "He's a Godfather." Yeah. I'm the storyteller, so it doesn't matter. But if I was a player and saw that, I would have just kind of known.
Yeah.
It was even as a storyteller, I was like, he drew the Godfather token again. I can tell, and he did.
Yeah. Well, we've had this conversation before. I think we've sort of read it before. The game doesn't start when you have your token. The game doesn't start when your hand is in the bag. The game starts the minute you're in the space with the people you're going to play with. Get in their heads. Get going now, because a lot of the tells come there as well. It's one of the, if you really want to be very good at Clocktower, which I'm not sure you should want to be good at Clocktower. You shouldn't want to be the best at Clocktower, because that makes Clocktower boring. I'll tell you that as someone who had that experience for a while. You don't want to be the best at Clocktower. You want to be good at Clocktower and have fun with it. But if you want to be better than you are, how people's mood dictates how they respond to a token and how they respond to an ability, how they respond to an accusation. And you can't sit there and be like, oh, they were really defensive when I nominated them. If they walked into your game cafe and were like, oh, I've just been having a terrible day, people at work, customer service is awful. And then they're defensive when you nominate them. No shit, that's, of course they are. The people are so important, and you need to pay attention to the people in order to have the context for the social reads that you're then going to make. If you don't know the person, or you don't have a read on the person sort of vanilla state, the social read is meaningless. So the game starts as soon as you meet the person.
Yeah. I also want to tell everybody that near the end of this, we'll take some questions from the audience. If anybody wants to ask anything, so that's the section we'll have. When you sit down and play drawing your token, do you hope that it's a blue or red token?
Yes.
All right, moving on.
I don't mind. I have a deep love more recently of tokens that allow me to be more chaotic. So someone asked me what my favorite character was earlier today in order to give me a friendship bracelet. And so I picked Goon, and they have helpfully done the Goon lettering with a red heart on one side, a blue heart on the other side, and it's red and blue beads. It was a good life choice. They nailed it. I love the Goon because it allows you to just play whatever game you're playing. The Ogre, I maintain that most people are playing Ogre wrong. Will I tell you how you should be playing it? No, I want to see if it happens. I really want to see how that meta develops, because the Ogre's got some play. It got a lot of play in playtest, which was with a slightly different variant of the Ogre. And so unlike a lot of the playtest characters, this is a divergence, but you'll survive. A lot of the playtest characters, it came out of playtest and hit the public sphere, being played by people who played it in playtest and being played with people who played it in playtest. And there's a strong correlation between playtesters and people who are willing to storytell new things off the bat, no problem. And so there's a real meta driving of how people were thinking about other characters that didn't happen with the Ogre, because we changed the Ogre like a month before we released it. Just a little bit, but enough that it changed the meta. And so the meta to the Ogre and the meta to a lot of characters is driven by how people play it. And I'm really interested because the meta for the Ogre is developing constantly at the moment. And I don't think there's an optimal way to play it. I think there's a most fun way to play it, and some people have found it, but other people aren't interacting with that based on the fact that this idea exists, and they're not playing it the way I think is most fun. So if you pull Ogre, try something new, and then tell me about it. and I will not confirm or deny whether that's the way I want you to play Ogre. But I'll be really interested to hear the stories. Because that meta's changing all the time, I keep having, like, no one's telling me new ways they've played the Tea Lady. No one's telling me new ways they've played the Monk. Those have been played thousands and thousands of times. With a character that's changed relatively recently in the history of Clocktower, people are telling me new ways they've done things all the time. And I'm really interested in how those develop. So that's one that I'm genuinely curious about. But that is a token I love drawing because it's not red or blue. It's whatever the tone is on the back of the tokens that's not the red or blue, the beige sort of parchment color. That's the color the Ogre token is, and you'll find out in a minute. Well, you probably won't find out in a minute. You'll find out in 40 to 90 minutes what color your token actually was. And that's one of my favorite things. I love playing into that sort of uncertainty. I have a lot of fun with that. And the damsel. I also always want to be the damsel. Nina also wants to be the damsel.
She has won a game as a damsel, claiming damsel 3 times apparently. Because if it's damsel on the script, she's claiming it. So statistically, sometimes she actually is going to be.
Yeah.
I love the Ogre. I've said it's my favorite character. I don't mind saying that the next time I've only pulled it once, and my goal is just not tell anybody anything.
All right.
Just to try it.
Yeah.
Because I always I like talking to Milk, and he always has an opinion. Try things. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Just try things.
This is also on a similar vein. The Ogre thing kind of harder to do, but one of the pieces of advice I give people all the time is if you want to try things, try it in TV. You can't do it with a specific Ogre-based play, but a lot of the time people are like, oh, I wonder what happens if I spend the entire game doing this, and then they try and do it on some janky-ass custom script with Psychopath and Vizier, and it's like, yeah, it didn't work for you, did it? Because there was no chance for your play to develop. Like, TV is the place to try those plays, and it's a lot of fun to do so, because you do end up subverting quite strong metas. Like, TV has a lot of strong metas about it because of the way that people play them, because of the experience they've had. Doing something weird in TV will win you games a lot of the time. It'll also get you executed a lot of the time. Sometimes both of those things are good, but it's a really good place. It's a really stable testing ground to do whatever you like. But yeah, do that with the Ogre, and let me know how it goes, because
we'll see.
Yeah.
My problem is I also mainly storytell.
Yeah.
I rarely play. I try to get more games in, but time schedules. All that stuff. But,
yeah.
You mentioned TV, so maybe it's a good time to start talking about scripts.
Oh yeah, we can do that.
And Trouble Brewing, we always talk about great beginner script, but it's also I run it for a lot of my players have played a lot, sometimes maybe few, probably 1,000 at least. And it's always fun to get to the end and it's final 3, and they're like, I don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
It's a great script for that. What do you think about Trouble Brewing?
I love Trouble Brewing. I think TV is the script where you have easily the highest odds of getting to a final 3 with a mystery, as opposed to with not necessarily a certainty, but a certainty for some people. And the thing about Clocktower and the balance of good and evil is that if even 2 good players have a certainty of what the world is, good probably wins. And this is one of the problems that does come up in SNV and BMR, most often in SNV, and people keep disbelieving me when I say that, but it's nonetheless true. You often get game states where at least 1 or 2 people are like, well, I'm certain that exactly this set of things has happened because of my own personal involvement, and so there's like 2 worlds, if not 1, as a result. And TV just doesn't have that. And so if you're getting to a final 3, it's almost always going to be interesting. Like, admittedly, you can get to a final 3 with a living virgin that's propped, sure. It can happen, and it does, but it still doesn't ruin the game, because a 50-50 shot is still a difficult shot for a good team. Especially because a lot of the time, the social play there is people commit to the virgin, and the virgin doesn't know everything. The spy knows everything. The virgin doesn't know everything, and so people do, the virgin's nominated this person, we should all vote for them. It's like, all right. Like, all you're telling me is there's only 1 person who I have to pollute, not 11, whatever, other players. But I think it's just a great game because it drives you to that climax most consistently and most interestingly almost every time. And in experienced groups, everyone's familiar, no one's uncomfortable. You just get to play the game for the pure joy of the game and nothing. No one's learning, no one's having to deal with anything else. It's like, yeah, we all know this, and we get to have Clocktower by itself.
The new player Trouble Brewing, which I love writing games for new people. It was fun because I had my a 9-player circle over here with a lot of new. Not everybody's brand new, but a lot of new players. And then right on the other side of the room is Zekin running like a 17-player game with Trouble Brewing with very experienced players.
Yeah,
I just kind of love that dichotomy.
Yeah, I had almost exactly the same experience where I was running I think it was 16-ish players Trouble Brewing next to someone running a 9-player TB, and we finished at the same time because all the new players are trying to work out what's going on. The nominations are very slow. The conversations are happening, and the experienced players are like, "Yep, next." Also, because I tend to run games briskly at the best of times, but it was quite entertaining. Just like, "Are you done?" It's like, "Yeah." Why would we not be? It's 16-player TV. If it's taken me more than an hour and a half, I'm failing.
Yeah, I've been on a real big kick lately on timing games. I was having my 9-player game ran, I think it was almost exactly an hour. I was very happy with that.
Yeah.
I did run a quick game of 16-player Extension Port yesterday, but also the Boom Dandy was execute day 1. So
Yeah, kind of not
I'll
the same.
count it.
Yeah.
It averages out. Now, I think the next game, which to be fair, that also had a butcher, so we had a
double executions. Yeah.
Extra executions.
Yeah.
Except for the time he was poisoned. And
I
had to say, all right, would you like to nominate? He's like, yes, I nominate. No.
Go to sleep.
We're going to sleep.
Yeah. I love that. Droisening or punking, depending on how close to April it is, Travelers is really fun. It's just really funny. It's always funny.
It was a great moment.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
hilarious.
It's just like people try expecting things and the gospel and it not happening. It's just always entertaining.
And then the next day I get to go, would you like to try to nominate? Yes, I'd like to nominate Delta. Okay, well,
yeah, go for it. Yeah. Nice. Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
All right, well, the character or the script you pulled up was Badman Rising. So tell us about Badman Rising.
So this is the thing I keep saying to people, and some people agree with me, and a lot of people hate it, and I don't care. BMR is the best base 3 script. Specifically because
this side of the
yeah, for a bunch of reasons, but one of the reasons that I love it so dearly is that it is different to the other two. A lot of people, some of you might be aware of indigestion brewing, and there's a lot of other variants of this idea of like, I want to make TB, but more. No, that's S&V. S&V is just TB, but bigger. Like that is what S&V is, and I think S&V is very well designed, but it's still not as balanced as BMR is. S&V is chaos, and so often, this is coming back to some of the things I said earlier about how often S&V is solvable. A lot of people, when they start playing BMR and they start playing S&V, they think that S&V is a game that they can work out and there's a logic and they'll be able to solve the puzzle. And they'll look at BMR and they go, stuff happens, and then later we try and work out what might have been the reason for the thing. And they don't understand that BMR is a logic haven, and S&V, there's a bunch of stuff that can happen that you literally cannot logic your way to a conclusion. But a lot of the time in S&V, you are balance of probability and execution. More often in BMR, you are logicking, hey, there's 3 demon candidates right now with the information we have. And yes, obviously some of the information we have is going to come from minions, demons, whatever, so it's going to be wrong, but like you should, most of the time you're following a logic path. And I think having a potentially solvable game that isn't quite solvable, based entirely on the actions of the players, is Clocktower. That is the epitome of Clocktower, is the agency of the people, how they chose to play the game and what they chose to say, influenced the deduction and made the deduction possible or impossible accordingly and allowed you to play the game. A solvable game is not a social game. A solvable game is a deduction game. You can do that logic puzzle on your own on Reddit. That's just the main place I see those puzzles at this point. There was a big trend of them a while ago, and they sort of dipped off, and then they've just all gone to Reddit. That's where all the puzzles have gone, and like so those aren't as interesting. Like the joy of BMR is that it's social and deduction, and it's beautifully in balance.
Yeah. Out of curiosity for the audience, so who's has their Badman Rising as their favorite script out of the base 3? All right. Handful of people around. How about Sex and Violence? A few more, maybe about the same. How about Trouble Brewing? Oh, yeah, it was pretty even.
Yeah.
All the 3 scripts.
So just as an aside, I've run 2 games this morning as special guest games, and I put them specifically on the schedule as I'm going to run a base 3, and we'll see who turns up and what they want to run. And I basically turned around to people and went, is there anyone who is like strongly wanting to play TB? Like for experience reasons, for comfort reasons, whatever else, don't care why. Do you strongly want to play TB? Got to know. And so I then turned around to this group and went, okay, so here's your choices. We've got the base 3. You can play objectively the best game design script, TB. You can play objectively the best script, or you can play S&B. And I maintain that this is true. The game design of TB is beautiful. BMR is amazing. It's the best script. And there's definitely people who will disagree with me, and that's fine. And that's part of the fun. But like, it's just got so much joy to it, and I will always back that. But the game design of TB is the best game design in Clocktower. To be fair, doesn't make it the best script.
That's fair. Anything else you want to say on S&B? Since I feel like you said a lot in so few words.
People is another place where people need to buck the trends a lot more. I did. Off Meta did a character ranking series. Adam has just walked in, which is one of the reasons that this came to mind immediately, where I got so much hate for making the Pit Ag a B tier minion. And I maintained that the way that people were playing at the time, it was true. People have got so much better. But all that people were doing with the Pit Ag was being a budget baron and being worse at it. Because they'd changed one person into an outsider. They'd change a second person into an outsider, probably fail because they didn't know which outsiders were in play, and then they'd die. And that's basically all they did. And all you did was confirm what minion was in play, when actually being able to hide a Serenovus, hide twins, hide various other things is actually way more useful than outing that there's a Pit Ag in play and changing outsiders, blah, blah, blah. And I got a lot of shit for that, and I was right. It's a lot better now because people aren't doing that. People are much more recognizing that there's stuff to do with the Pit Ag that isn't just make outsiders.
I ran a game of S&B last week. And one of my players are often guilty of doing the Baron with extra steps. But we have an evil twin game. The twin's 2 away from the demon. It's the Clockmaker 2. And Pithak says we need to get the demon away. So they made one of the other minions an evil snake charmer. So Justin, I got to get the Savant info of there's one evil townsfolk, which I rarely get to do in my games anyway. And that was a use I hadn't seen much in my games, and it was effective. Yeah. Do more with Pit. Do different things.
And just as everything, like...
I want to see more evil philosophers.
Yeah, evil philosopher is a thing I love. It's also, there's a bunch of like metas around seamstress, for example, clockmakers. The clockmaker meta has got a lot better. There used to be a big meta of you just execute the clockmaker for Vortox. Fuck off. So boring. That player's not getting to play anywhere near as much. That shouldn't be a contract of the game just because they drew clockmaker. But also we still have a lot of, like, there's a big trend of seamstress, night 1. All right, fine. But you don't have to do that, right? There's a lot of things you can do, but you don't have to. And I think S&B is a place where it's quite possible to look at a lot of the characters and be like, this feels like the best thing to do, right? And you're not wrong. This does feel like the best thing to do. Doesn't mean you should do it. Especially if you're playing a game with a group who like trying new things. Like, do that. Do something weird. Hold on to your seamstress ability until you think that you're at risk of dying. Use artist questions early or late game. Like, there's a big trend of artist questions on day 2. It's like, well, you've waited a tiniest amount. Not enough to actually have any information to base your artist question enough. So you might as well have just done it on day 1. Or wait until you have some information. Do it on day 3 or day 4 when there's something to work with. Day 2 is a weird one, right? There's a lot of stuff like that where people have this mentality of, well, this is the time you do the thing. Break every one of those metas you can think of. It's always a good thing to do.
The artist meta I see a lot is, was this person through this person?
Yeah.
And I mean, that can be helpful, and it has been helpful, but sometimes it's not. And I don't know. Yeah. I played in person once. We were talking the other day, yesterday, with some people who I was saying how when you're playing in person, you get to do some different things that you can't really do online because you're working with a different space. I remember just asking, there was like different couches. There was like a lobby in a hotel, not here, but a similar thing. And I was like, well, is there at least one evil player on this specific couch? The answer is yes. And somebody's like, "Why'd you ask that?" I'm like, "Oh, I thought it'd be fun."
Yeah. Whereas I had
more reason than that, and it made me realize the traveler was sitting on that couch with people.
Yeah. I had a BMR game earlier where 6 people made gossips about shoelaces. It was great. It was very fun. Everyone's suddenly looking at their feet. Like, hang on a minute, have I got shoelaces? Yeah, okay.
Well, this conversation came up when I was talking about it because somebody was talking about the OTC Live and that happened in California recently, which was great. And I guess our question had to do with who was wearing watches.
Yes.
And it's like that would be hard to do with online.
Yeah. I like the idea. So, just as an aside, this is a thing that I've had recently. I had it a long time ago and haven't seen it since, and then had it pop up again recently. I had a player do a thing that I loved in person, which was he walked up to me. I am going to need something to hide behind. He walked up to me and went, I would like to gossip that there are this many steps between the demon and the nearest minion. And no one else knows what that gossip is. The demon doesn't know what the gossip is. They can't change their kill accordingly. But I know what it is and he knows what it is. And that's really, really powerful because it's framing information for an evil team that they can do nothing about. And someone tried to do that right at the start. One of the first games of BMR they ever played. And I never saw anyone do it ever again until like 2 weeks ago when someone did it. I was like, I'd forgotten about that. Don't know why that didn't get picked up. I love that idea. And because it's still a perfectly valid gossip. Nothing in the gossip ability says that the context of the question is known. It just says that the statement has to be public, and the statement was fully public. The fact that the only person who knew the number was the storyteller is not my problem. I really like it. So things like that, you think about characters in ways you didn't think of them, and try it. As it turns out, that one went really badly for the gossip, but they tried something and it was interesting.
Yeah, so. Well, of course, we're talking about S&B and we're talking about the gossip now.
Yeah, that's true.
Since we're on the topic of S&B, I'd like to ask about Madness. How you feel like how you interact with it in the game. How do you feel it performs in the game? Just your thoughts on Madness.
I love Madness. I think it's a more experienced mechanic than people give it credit for. Especially because I do this. I know that I'm a hypocrite for saying this because I do generally recommend that people go from TB to S&B because, as mentioned earlier, S&B is just big TB, and therefore I think it's an easier step to make when you're like, okay, now I need to learn 25 new characters. There were only 22 before. How do I learn another? Anyway, so it is an easier step to do is to go to S&B than BMR, in my opinion. But Madness shines best with experienced players who are going to play it well. I strongly believe that don't just strongly believe. The Cerenovus is the poisoner. That is what the Cerenovus is on Big TB, is the poisoner. Its job is to give misinformation, even if it's temporary. It is by definition more temporary unless you are Cerelocking someone, but it is that's what it's supposed to do. It's trying to give misinformation. So while I appreciate that's a very sort of ethereal game design mentality to approach it with, I think that should inform, well, you want the game to be the best it can be so that you have the most fun. So play the thing the way it's going to be the most fun on a game design level. So what I say to my players, and if you play games with me here, I'll say this to you as well. I expect you to commit to Madness or don't. I don't want someone else to dob you in that you claimed Outsider as a mutant. I fully expect you to be like, oh, I'm claiming Outsider today, and then do it. Because you're choosing whether to do the thing or not. If you're trying to end run around the mechanics, you're not playing the people, you're not playing the game you're supposed to be playing, you're playing against the mechanics of the game, and that's not fun or interesting for anyone. It's most often not going to produce anything entertaining for you. You maybe get to be a little bit smug that you didn't get executed for Madness, but realistically, you know that you weren't really playing the game, and that's not ideal. So I tend to recommend to people, commit to the Madness. I'm running a secret thing that I'm definitely not telling you about. But one of the sort of mechanics I've added to that is people will get long-term rewards if they can maintain Madness so well that no one even suspects they were mad. I actively want to lead. I would love that to be the way that people thought about Madness. Is I want to be so good at this that people are like, I had no idea you were mad until the next day you were like, oh yeah, the Cerenovus bit me last night. That is the level that I want to be getting to with Madness. And yes, sometimes it's difficult, But this is a reason to maybe hard claim less. This is the other part of the Serenovus being the poisoner. And this is something that Steve's spoken to me about in the game design sense, was when he introduced the Serenovus onto what became the proto S&V, what people were doing was they were less willing to hard claim on days 1 and 2 in case they were Serenovus mad on day 3 and they had to recant stuff and it was too obvious and they'd get executed. So it's also got that interesting dynamic of, oh, maybe I need to be a little bit careful. Maybe rather than me being like, I'm the clockmaker with a 2, I'm the artist who's used my question. They've started to lean into, oh, I've heard of an artist who's used the question and they asked this and this is the information they got. Because they were covering their future ass if they got picked by Serenovus. And I really love that as like, that's a really fun way to play the game. I think that's really interesting. That's really cool on a sort of game design level. That's also really cool in terms of how you interact with people, right? You get much more out of that at that point when someone is coming to you and being like, okay, right, well now I can tell you that I'm this and you do that thing. That's a much more interesting game. So that's the level I like for Madness. Obviously, as I mentioned, I think it's an experience mechanic. So how harsh I am on that is always going to vary based on the play group. So every game I'm running at this convention, officially, like scheduled ones from now on, are for people that I've been like, this is experienced players only. We're playing whatever custom scripts people bring me. That's how I've set up those games. Is I've just told them turn up with a custom script, I'll run it. Those people are going to be treated very harshly on Madness. If I randomly run S&V publicly, I won't be in the same state, but I will still be giving people, this is the ideal. This is what we're aiming for.
Yeah. So your badge, I noticed, says rules guy on it.
Yeah.
And you're somebody I've taken a lot of inspiration for myself, for hoping to be knowledgeable about the rules, helping answer questions. I'm curious that as a player, how do you handle being in a game where the storyteller either seems like maybe they don't know the rules as well as you would hope, or maybe they're running a script that's a little like over their head? How do you handle that as a player?
As a player, it kind of, so I think those are two slightly different questions, so I can do them separately. If they don't know the rules as well as they should, it does make me a little paranoid, but I do just tend to lean into, okay, well, we'll just ask. At every opportunity, anytime there's a doubt about it, we'll just ask. At the end of the day, it's not the end of the world if we lose the game because a storyteller ruled a thing that we didn't realize was a ruling and we didn't even think to ask it, because why would we think to ask that thing that we didn't expect to be ruled differently? That's not the end of the world to lose that game, because we have a conversation afterwards being like, oh, we thought this because of that, but we still played an hour's game that we had fun during. We just got the wrong result at the end of it. Oh no, I lost a game of Clocktower. And so that's fine. So if they're making rulings that are wrong, rules as written, meh. We'll have the conversation afterwards. This is also a thing that I'm going to evangelize about. Always have your talk through after every game, no matter what game it is. I'm actively scheduling 2-hour games here because I'm expecting to finish any game between an hour and a half and an hour and 45, even if it's 15, 20 players, so that we have a little bit of time afterwards where we can chat about things, so that people can learn and develop. And like, if people have questions about my storytelling, I want them to be able to ask me the questions about my storytelling. I want them to be able to ask each other, why did you do X? Why did you choose to kill this person? Why did you break Madness when you broke Madness? Why did you do these things? Those are all interesting conversations that really drive the meta of the game, the meta of your group, your own play style. They drive your learning, they drive a lot. And so I'd much rather we just played the game and then have the conversation afterwards being like, just so you know, this is what the rules as written is. You probably want to have this in future. But also sometimes people will be like, yeah, I just think that this thing is rules as fun. But okay. As long as, and then I'll have that conversation with those people being like, in my experience, what you probably want to be doing is saying that way up top, that you rule the X is rules as fun. So that's the sort of thing that I tend to do. So knowing the rules isn't the end of the world. Right. Being out of your depth depends how you're doing it. If you're doing it in a like, you're just making some mistakes, fine. Same answer. If you're doing it belligerently, I think is probably the best term, is like people who think they can cope and can't. Those get much more difficult, and that's then a community problem. It depends whether if you're at a convention and that happens, you can maybe say something. It depends how you feel that the interaction is. That's definitely a situation where here you want to be talking to the, I forgot what they called them, the advisor, purple sashes, them. help you have some of that conversation. They're good for that sort of thing. Community guides, community liaisons, can't remember what they call them. Apologies. But like, if it's in your local board game cafe or in your local group, you want to be having the conversation, being like, so this is how we experienced the game. This is how it affected our enjoyment of it, and these are the things that came up. Can we talk about them and see where we can negotiate this as a community, as a group, how we should be dealing with this situation? And if you've got a storyteller who in that situation isn't going to be responsive, then that tells you all you need to know about whether you want to play with that storyteller anymore. And I find that there's really a strong correlation there. People who are obnoxious in response to feedback aren't good storytellers in the first place, and so because they never take the feedback, they never get better, so you don't want to play with them. Right, yeah. So you should always give, just as a rule in life, everyone should get at least 2, 3, 5 chances to do better. But if someone is going to keep turning down your chances to do better, you're perfectly allowed to stop giving them the opportunities. And obviously, how badly they've done does dictate how many chances you give them to do better. If someone's making minor mistakes, you can give them 50 opportunities. If someone's screwing you personally repeatedly, you can give them 1. That's fine. But that's a conversation in your community, and that needs to happen.
Yeah. Now, I wanted to ask that question, especially just about the rules part, because I like trying to know the rules, but it's a big, complicated game, especially if you're getting into like wacky experimental. So I think it's always good to preach kindness from players.
Yeah.
Be kind to your storytellers. I ran an extension board last night, and the player pulls out a token. She's like, I think something's wrong. She looks at me, and I'm looking at the marionette token. I'm like, sorry, everybody, we got to re-rack.
Yeah, I put the character this entire script is based around in the bag. Yeah.
Yeah, no. That's one sometimes.
Yeah, it's so easy to do. Yeah. I got saved from that earlier, actually. I accidentally put 1 too few tokens in the bag because I'd taken out an outsider for the Godfather, forgot to put a new one in. And someone arrived who was like 5 minutes late for the game and was like, "It's all right, I have to sit down." And I was like, "Yeah, sure." Went and took the bag back from wherever it had got round the circle. And there's like 6 tokens left in it. And I was like, there should be 7 tokens in here. So I got to put 2 in and move on. But it's like, it happens all the time. Mistakes are made. And if that had come up and so that had got to the end of that circle and someone had gone, "I've not got a token," the players would have been like, "All right, mistakes were made, that's fine." That's the attitude you should be carrying the vast majority of the time. Assume goodwill, assume you should be empathetic, all these things. And that feels like a really trite thing to say, but like it's really easy to feel antagonistic to the storyteller when things don't go your way. And it's very hard to empathize with them. But it's maybe a lot easier to empathize with your other players who can maybe understand the storyteller's decisions a lot more. And it might be easier for you to have those conversations. It's something I've recommended to people quite a lot. If you're feeling like the storyteller is making decisions that are difficult for you or your team, talk to other people first if you feel like you can't have the conversation with them, and they might give you the perspective that you are later going to hear from the storyteller without you feeling like it's a one-to-one antagonistic relationship that it would have been if you'd gone straight to them, because you're going to be, your hackles are up, you're going to be not in the position to be having a nice, caring, good community conversation. So having the conversation with your other players also helps you set the tone of how big a deal this was. And if you're all feeling outraged, that tells you a lot more, and then you can approach things a lot more sensibly. But 98% of the time, someone else will be like, "Oh, I think they did X because they'd heard me say Y to this other person, and so they thought that's what we all thought," or this sort of thing. This happens all the time where they'll be like, "Why did they kill me with the gossip or with the little monster or whatever else?" And it's like, well, because they thought something that you didn't know, and they didn't explain that in the run-through, because if you explain every decision you make as a storyteller in the post-game review, you're still there. So have those conversations.
Yeah. I want to do one more final question, then we'll start taking audience questions for anybody who wants to ask anything. Thinking about the characters that are on Bad Moon Rising, which character would you like to be in real life?
Oh, in real life?
That's the response I get every time I ask it, and I love it every time.
So I very suddenly discovered that there are 2 wolves inside me, and one of them went straight to Professor, because bringing people back to life, the idea that even though we can only do it once, it's still like, if I can do it once, it's possible, which means that someone can study me doing it once and we can work out how to do it again. That's a big deal. That means that we can teach other people to be professors. And so part of my brain went in that direction, like, immediately. And then there was a little bit of me that went in a fully different direction down DA. So, there's two wolves. One of them just being like, because you could use the DA in so many both terrible and good ways. Because it depends what we're calling execution. If we're calling death due to someone else, the idea of walking through a battlefield being like, nope. It's really funny to me, just being like, oh yeah, this is in my head, this is metaphysically an execution. They're gonna die. I'm stopping it.
Only one per day.
Yeah, it's
Which
true.
Is still helpful.
It's still pretty good, depending on what you can do. I don't know. BMR's a difficult one for this. Did Ben pick BMR right? Please tell me he chose Shabaloth.
I cannot.
He picked Minstrel.
I mean,
that's not if you were the thing you'd get to do that. That's just Ben. He makes people drunk. Admittedly, more people make him drunk, but he does do that. I had to introduce myself yesterday as I'm sat next to Ben and therefore I'm drunk, because it was true. I'd sat next to Ben for an hour and I'd had 4 drinks, and in the previous hour I had had half a drink. This is just what happens by proximity. But we are British. That does happen. Yeah. Good.
All right. Well, if anybody wants to come up and ask a question, we have a microphone here. The stream and the recording won't be able to hear it, so we'll repeat back the question. But yeah, feel free to come up if you have anything. Or if you don't want to come with the microphone, we can do it from the crowd too. Go ahead.
If your character could see a Broadway play, what would it be, and why? And also, what is your favorite silly question you've ever been asked?
That's a good question.
That's fair.
So
I mean,
so repeat the question.
Oh yes, true. So I'm going to assume that I've drawn my sailor token. So the question I got asked was, if my character could go see any Broadway play, which one would it be? And also, what's my favorite silly question? For people who don't know, I ask stupid questions all the time because partially it was initially it was a bit of a handicap. I was like, if I spend when I was one of the most experienced or most knowledgeable players in the world, I won games a lot and that was boring. So I deliberately handicapped myself by making sure that I had no information for the first 2 days, and then I had to play catch up on day 3, and that was more fun for both me and other people. So I started asking stupid questions, and then I discovered that the social read of the stupid questions was giving me nearly as much information anyway. But we had a good time, and it's very silly, and sometimes you can really nail a stupid question that people just really have a good time with. So I think the problem with the sailor token is that I have to say New York, New York, because I don't think there's another answer to that question. But other tokens would have had a more interesting one. My favorite stupid question I've been asked, I've had some really good ones. Someone asked me the other day, this is just one of the more recent ones. My memory's terrible. I can remember stuff in the short term, long term, it's gone. But someone asked me the other day a question along the lines of, if your character was an alien watching the soap opera of Earth, who would their favorite character on this sitcom soap opera situation, who would their favorite character be? And that was just a wild question that was like, okay, so I've got 7 billion people to choose from. Great. So let's start from here. And it was just like, great. I have no idea what I think. The idea of putting, medieval characters in space watching the entirety of Earth was just a lot of fun. That sort of thing is great, right? I can't even remember what I said. I said something really stupid. I think I said Pol Pot, which is, just a dictator who's been dead for some decades, I don't actually know how many, which, told that person absolutely nothing, but was very funny to me, because I was the summoner, to be clear, and I was cluing into this was someone I thought might want to be turned evil, so when I gave them an evil person, I thought they might notice and be like, you're the Mezephiles. And then I would have summoned them and it would have been very funny. Because that's one of my favorite things to do, incidentally. I did that recently, started doing that recently. If you're the summoner, claim Mezephiles, give people a Mezephiles word, and then summon them. They're like, well, I did turn evil, but it wasn't you.
Anyway. Any other questions? Yeah, come on up.
Well, audio, okay.
Yeah.
First, I believe a lot of what you say advice for Clocktower is just advice for being a good human being, so I appreciate that.
But my question is, early on in the panel today, you said you give a lot of advice on the game back to the creators. What piece of advice did you give early on that probably had the biggest impact on the current version of the game today?
What piece of advice did you give to the creators early on that affected the game today?
That's an interesting one. So I give TB was pretty solid before they did the Kickstarter. So TB didn't really change. I think the wording on one token changed between the Kickstarter and the final version. It was not much. It was one or two. BMR and S&V had like tweaks. They didn't have big things. So a lot of the early stuff was like general, like how the game feels, finding broken things type feedback. A lot more of where I had an influence was on all the Kickstarter characters, because TBI didn't really have a plan exactly of how they were going to release those. They were going to be in the copy of the game, but Ben and I and some of the other like core volunteers at the time did sort of go, if we send this box to people with the base 3 and a bunch of extra tokens in there, all the people who've played any games at all, online or in person at conventions, wherever, Good Game Stores, up until this point, are just going to pick those up and be like, "Oh, shiny," and play with them. So there was a long conversation that Ben and I had with Stephen Owen about Kickstarter characters and how we were going to release those. And what ended up happening was they were like, "Yeah, okay, we'll release them on stream," because the stream advice started being successful. There were a lot of people watching. It was one of the main ways that TPI were able to influence how people were playing the game and influence the community. And so we started doing them on stream, and we did the first release, and Ben explained to his understanding how the character worked, and that was the extent of the guidance that went out, was Ben talking about it on stream. And I love Ben dearly. He's not the most rules-conscious person in the planet. So I was like, oh, sure. And at the time, I was just another volunteer who had access to the playtest stuff, and I just wrote a guide how to play whatever the first, I don't even remember what the first Kickstarter character release was, just how look, was it Pixie?
Yeah.
Oh, good. I'm glad someone remembers. So I just wrote a guide on how to storytell the Pixie, any interesting mechanics, and then I very quickly emailed Steve being like, I think it has problems with these other characters that are in the Kickstarter list, so we need to think about these things. And so a lot of what I was doing was that sort of proof ahead of time, and then writing those guides, and I've got a bunch of other things like that. Yeah, I think that's probably the best answer to the question. The other bit that you said beforehand of a lot of the advice I give to people is advice on being a good human. Like, yes, thanks for noticing. Like, good. I think I say this all the time. We mentioned community in a box. Everything that you practice in Clocktower is a good opportunity to learn to be a better human. Every time you're interacting with another human, it's an opportunity to be a better human. This is a great way to practice in a way that is completely harmless if you fail to be a better human. As long as you're still within the structures of what your community accepts and the rules of the game and everything else, if you try something and it doesn't go well, and this is one of the things I was saying earlier about the Neurospicy love the game, because people who are very used to masking because they're autistic or have a lot of other mental health conditions, to have a space where they can choose to go, I'll try this, and no one's going to be offended in the grand scheme if I get it wrong. But this also applies to everyone, and no matter how well adjusted you think you are, you're not. Everyone's fucked up somehow. You have lived. That's how you can tell. The scars aren't just on the outside; they're on the brain as well. And so, the Clocktower is a really beautiful opportunity to spend time with people, to talk to people that exist in a community, and have an opportunity to be better and be different and do different things. And so, I tell this to people all the time: yes, do these things in your Clocktower community, and what you will notice is that by doing them in your Clocktower community, you'll take them to your work, you'll take them elsewhere, and you will learn to be a better human everywhere else. It's the whole, a choice is a choice. A choice made twice is a habit, and a habit made twice is part of your personality now. So make the choice once, and then make it again, and then make it again, and then make it again, and you're making yourself a better human, and you should all do that. I should do that too. I'm a terrible person. This isn't supposed to sound one directional.
I saw a comedian about a week ago, and he had a big long bit about anxiety. He basically said everybody has mental health issues. think you don't, your mental health issues delusion.
Yeah. Nice.
Good.
My question is, now we have this big World Cup going on right now with online, and you've been involved in a lot of those games. Why was the World Cup chosen as the next step after the new release characters, and how does that change the dynamic of the players?
Interesting. Do you want to...
So how was the? I'm terrible at restating questions.
It's okay.
It's picking up.
Is it picking up?
Okay.
Oh,
Good.
cool.
Everybody can hear that.
Great. So the World Cup is something that Ben deeply loves as a concept. Ben has real strong feelings about homebrew, script design, and audience fun. And that by audience fun, I mean TPI's audience in terms of the playing community, not the audience who watched the stream. I mean like the audience of the game. And like I wasn't necessarily deeply involved in this decision making, but Ben has always wanted to encourage people to do better at writing custom scripts and to do better at writing homebrew and to do better at a lot of things. And a lot of that comes from the fact that most people write a script, yeet it out into the universe and go, done. And so he really wanted to, the original World Cup, a lot of the idea was around trying to get good custom scripts made, because what was happening was there were sort of, I don't know, 10 that the community was coming back to over and over, some of which aren't great. And we wanted more. We wanted more custom scripts that people were enjoying and that would turn up all the time, and no one would be offended. The Extension Chord's probably quite a good example. It's a script that, like, if I rolled up to a game at my local board game cafe and they were playing Extension Chord, I'd be like, great, fine, cool. That's a known public script that is not TPI written, but it is a good, solid script, fun. Love the fact that that's visible, but that's one. Most people here could probably name another 3 or 4 that are on a similar sort of level, but that's only another, we're talking 4 or 5 total so far. I'd love that to be 50 or 100, and all of them to be good and balanced and not have broken interactions, and for people to be able to, one of the things I love about Extension Chord, which I don't know about a lot of custom scripts, is you really can do the, I'll just tip tokens into the bag and then amend the setup, and you can just go with it, and 95% of the time it'll be a good game. And that's true of the base 3, it's true of the Extension Chord and a few other custom scripts. There aren't enough of those. There aren't enough of those, certainly in Ben's opinion, and so he wanted to reinforce that. But the problem is, if you just do another script competition, it doesn't really get the same response. We did a bunch of those during the Kickstarter releases. So he wanted to do something that was a bit more interesting, and the other problem he has is there's a lot of really janky, shitty homebrew out there. And so doing this sort of thing where publicizing just a small homebrew adjustment and people seeing how broken they quickly get and how difficult they are to balance and how many choices the storytellers have to make and how the storytellers have to make rulings in the moment. Because that's one of the other things you don't see, right? Because people who are willing to storytell in the public eye are people who know how to storytell because they're willing to storytell in the public eye. And if they're not, people who already know how to storytell, they're usually egotistical white men, and we don't want that. So you want people who know what they're doing to storytell in the public eye, but that means that all the people who want to learn to storytell only see people who know how to storytell already. And so this was a really nice way to combine homebrew, script writing, and storytellers making decisions in the moment, which is critical for the entertainment of the players and the fun of the game, and for people to be able to see that decision making of, okay, I think I'm going to do X because Y. And then, ideally, I think most of the streams have had this that have been doing the World Cup. Then at the end of the game, they get to explain that to the players and be like, oh, I chose to make this ruling because of this thing, or I chose to kill this player with this because of that. And you get to actually experience what is happening all over the community, but it never gets seen because all the storytellers who are storytelling online don't know what they're doing, and so you don't see it. You're not going to see one of us sit here on a base 3 and be like, oh, I don't remember this interaction, so I'm going to make this ruling. You will see it on the World Cup. Like Ben and I had multiple times, we were just like, right, we're going to rule this because we think it's the most balanced thing. And one of the things I took real joy in doing, and one of the reasons that I've been choosing to go and storytell with Ben for the World Cup on the TPI streams, is so that I can argue with him. And some of the times I've argued with him with the full intent of, I'm just putting a devil's advocate position out there because I want to see people, we both want to see people having to make that decision, and like, so we're voicing out loud the thoughts that a storyteller should be having, and sometimes I'm arguing with him because I think he's wrong. And if you can't tell which is which, great, because that's what should happen, right? You shouldn't be able to tell whether I'm being a devil's advocate, but it's a good demonstration of good storytelling, and again, being a good human. We're very much the
I think we have time for probably one more quick question. Go ahead.
Okay, so I think one of the more rewarding things as a storyteller for like new players, but not brand new players, is seeing them sort of discover on their own some of the interactions that are baked in. Like for TB, seeing two players who have never watched any Clocktower online discover I can do a role swap, having an Undertaker and a Raven Keeper switching. It's like, that's really rewarding. And I guess the question is, how long did it take storytelling trouble brewing for you to feel like you saw every possible thing that you could do with any of the characters? Like, where did the critical point come where it's like, I've seen everything? I guess metas kind of develop where people do unexpected things, but usually there's like, I think, a finite amount, at least in Trouble Brewing, where it's like, this is every interaction that's possible. And then do you think that it's the same for BMR and S&V where it's capped, or are those more like unbounded?
That's a really good question. Mechanically, I'm going to answer mechanically because socially, world, oyster, do what you like. There's people still do stuff in TB socially, which I'm like, that seems batshit, my friend, but you go for it. And I love that. That's great. So socially, no. Mechanically, TB, I'd guess it was somewhere between. Actually, the Spy and the Recluse make that question really difficult for TB. I'm certain there's things I've not yet done with them, even when I've been storytelling for Patters and deliberately trying to fuck with them, that I've not done yet. But like, I think I have seen them all. But it probably would have, because of the Spy and the Recluse, it would put it into the sort of like 300-400 games of TB rather than, if those didn't exist, it's like 20. But because the Spy and the Recluse do exist, then it pushes it way up. BMR, I think, is limited mechanically, because it's the solving script, it's the logic script. It is limited mechanically, but there's also a lot more things that interact, and there's a lot more things that interact in a lot of ways. So that probably sits in the same sort of space, the sort of 200 odd, I'd guess. S&V, I'm pretty sure, I know there's at least one mechanical thing that I've still not had happen yet, either as a player or as a storyteller. And I keep waiting to either draw the right token and find out that my fellow evil team is the right thing, or I've been putting a specific bag into S&V like every third S&V game I've run for like 2 years, waiting for someone to do this thing because it's very funny and I can't wait to see it happen. And it's not happened yet. So I'm like, no, I'm not going to tell you what it is. But yeah, at some point that'll happen and I will celebrate. But at the moment I don't think that's true. And I've run a lot of games. I can check that.
Remember when you posted, you hit your, I think, 1,000th game ran.
Yes, 20.
And that's been a while ago.
It was 2021, I think, that I got to my 1,000th game story told. And at the time, I'd story told 1,000 games and I'd played like 42. Like, that's the scale that we're operating in, right? So, yeah. Where's my tracker?
When the stats came out, mine said something like, at least on the app, like 300, 200 something games total. Like 50 of those are played. Yeah, I mean, the app has got that for me because I vast majority play in person. So the app stats are quite weird for me. My three most played characters on the app are the Mezephiles, the Pixie, and the Stewart. That's an absolutely insane trio to have as your most played characters. So yeah, let's have a look. Ooh. So story told, I'm at 2,500 games, just under 2494, and of those 800 are S&V. I've story told way more S&V than BMR because people keep asking for S&V. I can't help it that they're wrong. But yeah, that's and when you run that many games, you'll find that you have some batshit opinions that people will be like, how can you possibly think that's true? And apparently I do. But also you find that you know people really well and it's really interesting and it makes it much more fun than playing with people that you've maybe story told that many times for
to have interactions that you don't get to have otherwise. Like I'm looking, there's people in the room who I've story told for certainly three figures times. There's one person in the room I've probably sold story told 4-figure times for, and I still have fun every time because that person changes every time I storytell for them, and our relationship changes every time I storytell for them, and every time they storytell for me, and every time we play together, the relationship just changes and changes and changes and changes, and so it's really fun.
We're out of time, so real quick, is there anything you would like to plug, either at the con or just more in general?
Donate money to the Planned Parenthood charity auction. There's a lot of fun items on there. You can come do this. You can sit in my seat and talk to Sam.
Yeah, we are doing a hard claim interview if you want to.
Yep. There's a bunch of other things. There's some Survivor stuff. There's a bunch of there's time with me. There's burning Patters's face off, which is something that I think we can all agree is a great situation. Anyone who's not aware of that sounds very weird. The more money that goes into the charity auction, the hotter the spiciness that Patters has to eat of hot ones. And we're not that far off me having to do it. 2, I have regrets. Can you just forget the last 30 seconds? I'm white British. I cannot handle spice. Do not get over that boundary where I have to eat them too. I will die. Yeah, it is for a very good cause. It's Planned Parenthood. We should be supporting. And then, I've got the panel tomorrow, I've already mentioned, sort of with Milk and Nor. And then otherwise, come play games, be a good member of your community. Go and find, this is something I rant about all the time, so I'm just going to say this. It's not plugging for me, this is plugging the community. Go and find the person who fixes problems in your community and ask what you can do to help. I say this all the time, but people just don't notice. Like, it's really easy to not see the person who's like, oh, these people are having an argument, I'm going to go mediate that. Go and find out who it is and ask what you can do to help them, and they will love you for it, and your community will get better. That's the thing I would love to plug to all of you.
All right. And for Hard Claim, we stream every Friday on Twitch at 9 p.m. We post videos, interviews. We'll put up our interviews those go up at 1 o'clock on Sundays. We post games from our stream. Then I have a Patreon if you want to help support just a little bit. All right. Well, Ed, thank you very much for joining. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Get up for Ed.
Thanks, everyone.
And thank you all for joining. Really appreciate it. And thank you. And then
who did I? What seat did I draw?
9.
Fuck. Okay, I could tell it was evil because there were 2 reactions, yourself and someone over here, that told me it was evil, and I was like, all right. Didn't realize it was the demon.
Although to be fair, we put out tokens this way. Technically, we would have swapped the lunatic and the Poe token.
That's true. Yeah, I mean, Drunking the Lunatic is. I love Drunking the Lunatic. It's really it's just so much fun, especially later in the game. I will try and do that, by the way. Innkeeper, try and find lunatics and pick them so that the evil team doesn't get any hits. It's always quite interesting. That's an interesting setup.
Mostly, I try to pick characters that would be interesting for you to draw.
Yeah.
So.
I really hope Seat 6 tries to bluff Tea Lady. Because this is a target-rich environment right here, right? That's a lot of fun. That's a fun setup. Right.
All right.
Cool.
Thank you all very much. We appreciate it.